Welcome to the DCC Museum.
My name is Peter Doodson. I was a designer at Philips from 1969 to 2002. I come from the UK. I was born in Peterborough. I went to, first, as part of my study, I went to Birmingham College of Art and then later on to the Royal College of Art in England. And before I moved to Philips, I had a job for a couple of years at Hewlett-Packard in Scotland. And I then answered an advert which said, calling young designers, and there was a picture of the Evoluant in Eindhoven. I thought, oh, that looks like a nice design office. But in fact, of course, it turned out at that stage to be a museum for Philips. But still, it was a very nice office at Philips. I worked with many, many international people and worked over the years on many, many projects. Dictation machines, video recorders, professional instruments, electron microscopes. And as a sideline, I got involved in a great deal of software packaging. So I worked on the CD box, DCC, CDI, DVD, Blu-ray, and lots of different variants in between. Oh yes, I'm really very much an industrial designer, a product designer. And I've worked over the years on hardware, on equipment, from radios to, as I say, to dictation machines, pocket memos, video recorders, professional instruments of all kinds. And it's only that I got involved with music carriers because Polygram was a leading light at that time, and that was a daughter company of Philips. And so when they had a new product in the pipeline, they instinctively came to Philips Design, which was the design consultancy for the whole of the Philips group. Well, they came to our department when they had this new carrier called Compact Disc. They came to our management, and I think our management didn't quite know which designer to give it through to. And they thought I might be suitable because I was working on small objects. I was working on pocket memos which came in presentation cases, and I was working on hearing aids which also came in little cases. And so they thought because of that I was the ideal person to work on this small object which would be a case for this new disc. I think every other person within the department at that time was working on bigger objects, televisions, professional instruments, radios, which are all rather large at that time. So that's how the whole adventure with Polygram started. When Polygram and Philips Audio first came to our department requesting design advice on a new packaging for this compact disc, then they showed me this is how they might market it if we don't come up with a new idea. And this in fact was the paper sleeve, a mini LP, which is how the CD might have been marketed if I hadn't come up with alternative ideas. In the original briefing, they wanted a package which would cost no more than, I think, 10 cents at that time. And I designed a 3-part package, moulded plastic, but it was costed out at that time as more than 1 guilder. They were very worried about that and had to go all the way up to Mr. Timmer to get approval to go ahead for that package. And he said, of course, it gives extra perceived value to the product, and this is a sort of package that we must have. And so I got permission from the top, and they went ahead and made the molds. And because the package was such a success and was adopted by so many other manufacturers, the price did come down. And at one stage, the molded price was very, very close to 10 cents. But then suddenly in about 1989, again, Polygram Philips Audio came to our department requesting a design workshop for this new digital cassette they were going to launch. And it had the code name Decor. It wasn't DCC at that time. And they came with a whole list of requirements because the cassette of course had to follow standards set by the compact cassette. And so there wasn't a tremendous amount of freedom, especially in the cassette design. But it was interesting in the brief that they came with because they listed all the plus points and the minus points and the neutral points of the existing compact cassette. And that was very interesting to build on that. I was working on the cassette and the packaging. I had no idea how the machines that would be playing this cassette would look. The machines, I think, at that time would have been being designed, I think, in Hasselt in Belgium, probably Marantz in Japan. Hi-fi equipment, modular equipment fitting in a rack system. It obviously would be nice to show the artwork, but I think the artwork would come into its own in a series of portable players. I know the first portable players which came out had no artwork visible at all. But I remember we did make 2 or 3 dummy mock-up models of possible future directions for portable players. I think the museum has a photograph of those 3 models. I don't think they ever went into production, ever considered for production, but they were showing the artwork a lot more. Unfortunately, the system was withdrawn from the market and technology has taken it off in a completely different direction. But I still have some ideas in my head of how a future portable player might look. Most portable players are kind of, the cassette fits into a slot, but there's no reason why a portable player couldn't echo the feeling of the package. You could theoretically put the disc, slide the disc into the player. It then lowers onto the heads, perhaps. You have some controls at the side, but you retain the imagery of the package, and you have full artwork visible. That is a possibility, but of course technology's moved on, and we'll never see this anymore.
That's sort of the way the car player
It's just that
works.
I was thinking yesterday, I do have just a few little thingies I'll show you just. So this is a possible design direction. It's only a concept, there's no detailing, but here you see the product, which in fact is an echo of the package. The cassette is sliding into the holder, but of course you have the tape hubs underneath, and so you have to raise up this section to load the cassette, and then of course you would have to somehow with a spring or a little motor push the holder down onto the tape heads. Tape makes contact with the head, and that would look then something like this. So it becomes a very clean little portable unit. But then of course I started to think about, well, this is digital and technology is moving ahead. There's no reason why this cassette couldn't be played once only and the digital content downloaded into a digital storage. So I felt that there's a possibility that the digital storage and the control area with the battery could click off, and it could have some kind of connection with a headphone, either via Bluetooth or some sort of physical headphone connector, that this is the thing you take with you in your pocket. This stays at home. This has dumped, as it were, the digital information onto the memory here, and this is the small object which you take with you. But of course, this now has become your smartphone. So
Even what was discussed on June 23rd, you listened very carefully.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
So you.
I think Albert came up.
Albert,
Yeah,
yeah,
Albert.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought what is very interesting, the way the concept could have been developed. I think at the time, 1994, 5, it was on the market. I think that the storage technology wasn't up to it yet. I don't think it was only in its beginnings, I believe. I don't really know how much on a DCC cassette. I assume 500 or 600 megabytes of information. I don't know how much.
No less.
Less.
250.
Oh, 250. So yeah. So it just shows that, and theoretically, if the cassette is played, if the digital information is downloaded onto a storage device, then the sound quality shouldn't be affected in any way. So yet it's a pity that sort of trend was never explored, because that would have been a very interesting direction to go in. And of course, okay, maybe I've got the dimensions wrong, but this is only conceptual. It's kind of as a possible way that portable players might have gone. It's really, I mean, I was a great CD collector. I was using CD quite a lot, but I was also a compact cassette collector, and I used to record a lot of radio programs, especially BBC programs on compact cassette. And also, because I lived in Holland and I wanted to hear BBC programs, I got my family, my father particularly, my father would record BBC programs for me over the FM in England and then send me the cassettes here, or I'd pick them up when I go to visit. In those days, of course, there was no internet, and you couldn't get the BBC only on the long wave, which was very poor quality. Because I had a small apartment in England, and I had a DCC 600 there, and a good FM tuner, and so I used to make some very good recordings. I think obviously I was limited to the FM frequency range, which I think is a lot less than what the DCC cassette is capable of. But I think I really couldn't tell the difference. I made some very good recordings of orchestral music and speech programs. So they form the bulk of my collection now, really. The DCC recordings I have made myself. I have a few pre-recorded ones, but not so many, 20 or so. Yeah, I didn't know there was a revival on DCC. I'd really completely forgotten about DCC. When I'm in the UK, I make recordings on my DC 600. Here I had a portable, I think a DCC 700, I think it was, but it was broken.
170.
Oh, 170, but it was broken. And so I hadn't been able to use it for a few years. But then, of course, I like looking at YouTube, and I discover all kinds of YouTube channels about retro technical equipment, and I came across the site of Techmoan. And I was fascinated by, and of course I listened to Techmoan first about Betamax recorders and VHS recorders and Laservision, and then one day I stumbled on him reviewing DCC. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then, of course, doing the discussions, discussion on television, he mentioned the museum. Yes, so I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I immediately, I think there was a link, but I can't remember whether I'd used the link or whether I Googled it, and I came across DCC Museum, and so I sent an email to the museum saying who I was. And I did have some old material which you might be interested in. Well, a lot of the material I had was printed material. I had the original design sketches, but I also had photocopies. And when I'd agreed to give the material through to the museum, I scanned most of the printed material. I scanned the sketches, so I still have that connection with the material. I didn't particularly need to have the original. And as I say, it had been sitting in my cellar for almost 25 years, different cellars in different houses. I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't want to throw it away because I realized it had historical value, but I didn't really want it for my own value. So when a DCC museum came along, I thought, well, these people deserve to have what material I have and to help add to their collection. Luckily, I still had the design sketches. What happens as a designer when you make mock-ups and do sketches, you often lose them. They go to the commissioner because the commissioner has paid for them. So he often keeps all this. Luckily in this case, I think for various presentations, all my sketches were colour copied. And so colour copies got distributed and I happened to keep the original. Over the years I've worked on many projects, but I think the CD jewel box, although it's only a simple product, I think has been most successful for me. I mean, when you're busy with the activity, you just get the requests from the commissioner. They want a design, you give them the design, and then they're all happy with it and they go away. There's very little feedback. Really, there's no, you don't. Over the years, I think I've never really got much praise for the designs I've worked on. They've just been accepted, gone into production, and on to something else. The image of CD is the jewel box in a way. People can't get too excited about. Well, the silver disc was quite exciting as an object, but it's the disc, it's the package with the artwork which excited people, and the variations of artwork, and that image, that digital image of the CD, is something I try to bring over onto the digital image of the cassette, and I think I've succeeded. The two complement each other very well. And then with DCC, the technical aspect is the magic, of course, but it's very difficult to bring that over to people. They just see the object which they can buy and have at home, and I think the DCC cassette in its packaging seems to, yeah, it's got a nice visual appeal, a nice simplicity, and luckily very different from the image of compact cassette. As somebody said in the briefing once, very difficult to do a new cassette because over the years so many designers have been involved trying to do new designs for the compact cassette. I remember many Japanese companies hiring top Italian designers to make interesting new cassette designs, and they were interesting, but of course they still had to work within the framework and technical requirements of the cassette, and they still had to have the ship, and the ship meant it had to go into the same old plastic box. And so luckily with DCC we've got, within the constraints, total new freedoms. I never had much contact with Timmer. Really, I mean, Timmer was the top, he was the boss, he was the big boss of Polygram, and the meetings I went to were on a much lower level. The first time I had any contact with him was when the design had to be passed up to him for approval. But I don't think I met him personally at that time. I think I met him once at a meeting, but I think I met him once. I had to introduce myself because I think I was passing through London Airport and I saw him, so I introduced myself, but I'm not sure if he really knew who I was. But then, of course, he went on to Philips, to be the big boss of Philips after Polygram. So obviously he must have remembered my name and activities. So there was a little contact. And what was rather nice, on the day I retired in 2002, he phoned me up to congratulate me on my retirement, which is very nice for some boss who I hadn't seen for many years. He actually phoned me up and congratulated me and thanked me for my efforts over the years at Philips. So that was very nice.
Okay, so we're sitting in your design chairs. Does that mean that industrial designer's mind never stops working,
yes,
even after
indeed.
retirement?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Well, I was presented with a problem here. On that, I have a balcony here, but there is a relatively high wall at the edge below the glassed balustrade. And I found that when I was sitting in a normal chair, I couldn't see the river very well. So I felt I needed a high chair. So but I didn't want anything too heavy, and I certainly couldn't find anything in the shops. So I designed this and had it made, and had a couple of them made. So although we're facing in the wrong direction now, if we put these at the edge by the balustrade, we can look over the balustrade and see all the activity on the river.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having us, Peter.
Thank you.
And thank you for everything you've done for DCC. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.